So welcome to Bedhead Cast. This is our first episode, The Meeting of the Minds. The podcast is focused on mental health and sleep, as you know. In this episode, though, we want to introduce our listeners to you, my good friend, Dr. Chris Gorman, and myself, Dr. Samuels. And we want to talk a little bit about ourselves, let the people know who we are, why we chose the medical profession, how we got there, why we chose our respective specialties in psychiatry for yourself, Chris, and sleep medicine for myself, and why we wanted to do a podcast, like what brought us to this whole notion of doing a podcast. So let's get started.
Well, Chuck, you know, as one of Canada's leading musicians.
That's not me.
It is not you. It's the lyrics were, comes a time when you're drifting.
Right.
And I've done a lot of drifting. I've moved around to a lot of different places.
Okay.
And then comes a time when you settle down.
Okay.
And this is my last act as a psychiatrist at the sleep clinic.
Yeah.
And so far, it's going pretty good.
Okay.
It's going pretty good.
Okay. So we always start the podcast with the word of the day. That's what we've come up with in a way of getting things going. And the word of the day today is luxury. So do you want to explain to the listeners why we chose that word? Or?
Well, yeah, luxury is, the definition is essentially something that is not necessary for your general well-being.
Okay.
And as you have said many times, sleep is not a luxury.
Right.
It's a necessity.
Yes.
And in our society, I think you've mentioned that it's seen as a luxury. You know, if I can get by with 6 hours sleep, I'm better than you. And in mental health, not only is it not a luxury, it's something that people don't even want to think about.
Right. Yeah.
But it's a necessity, and it's linked. There's the biggest linkage for mental health is sleep problems.
Okay. And I think that's what brought you and I together. And I've been doing sleep medicine for 25 years with my background in family medicine first and then doing a specialty. But the thing is that, over 25 years, I know that sleep is important. It's related to medical disorders and psychiatric disorders. But when you came to me and with such great passion and such an extensive career in psychiatry and said, look, you need to understand that sleep is fundamental to helping people with mental illness. This was quite interesting, and so I think it's really important that we address that, and that's sort of the purpose of the podcast. So luxury, essentially, we chose the word because we want to get the point across to the listeners that sleep is not a luxury, it is a necessity. And someone recently described it to me as the fifth vital sign, which I thought was pretty fascinating. And that was a psychologist who shares your view about the importance of sleep in mental health and whatnot. So that's what we're doing.
Absolutely. And just to put a little plug in.
Yeah.
This is the BEDHEAD Podcast.
Right.
You told me to bring that up.
To bring that up.
Yeah,
every once in a while, we're learning how to do this.
We're learning how to do it. And yeah, I'm glad you say, I am passionate about sleep and mental health problems, and I couldn't agree more that it's a fifth vital sign. It may, in fact, be the first vital. Well, it might not be the first vital sign, but certainly I think it exceeds pain. There's been this emphasis on chronic pain over years, which is very important.
Yeah.
But if somebody has pain, they also can't sleep.
Right.
And see that as again, it always keeps coming up as the priority.
Yeah.
But I joined with passion, but I was also desperate. There were many
You were in a
places I
desperate state.
applied, and
No one would take you anymore.
Yeah, they thought we know him well enough, so you gave me a chance.
None of this is true. None of this is true. He's a brilliant psychiatrist and was actually my teacher in medical school. So that this relationship has lots of legs, and we're going to talk about that right now. And what I want to bring up about this sort of forming of the podcast, which is very foreign to us.
Yes.
So we have lots of help out there getting us all collected up and figuring it out. It's a 6-month journey to the first episode, which is quite an achievement.
Yeah.
Well done.
For sure. Yeah, I think so.
But this came from you. This is your brainchild, and it came out of a radio show that you did. And I want you to tell the listeners about that.
Yeah, it was, we did a radio show in Vancouver for Vancouver Co-op Radio, and it was called Beautiful Minds. Mm-hmm. And all of the people that were part of it had struggled with some kind of mental health problem, but they were just such a fantastic group, because people with mental health problems frequently have a creative side to the condition, and it was really a really satisfying thing to do.
How many years did you do it?
We did it for 4 years, and it's sort of I'd written a book called Optimal Performance.
Okay.
Without Killing Yourself, and
was that the title?
That is the title. It was essentially to say people that have mental health problems often are aiming for optimal performance, and they're often better than, let's say, the average person. It's not like people with mental health problems are less than, they're actually more than.
Okay. Yeah, so Chris, did you guys have guests on your podcast, or did you just do what we're planning to do, which is just tell stories between the two of us?
Yeah, we had guests, and they were all, very, very interesting. But yeah, you're right. We're going to start out with this, having conversations about
and telling stories.
And telling stories.
Okay, so what took you to medicine?
Well, I had some ill health problems when I was a young kid, and I had some cousins that were doctors, and so I sort of aspired to become a doctor, and luckily got in. And and I wanted to help people.
And what took you to psychiatry?
That's a great question. I would have never thought of becoming a psychiatrist, but when I did my psychiatry rotation, it was over Halloween, and the patients got dressed up for Halloween, and I had never seen more creative costumes in my life. Yeah. And I sort of thought, these are super interesting people. They need help.
Right.
And the psychiatrist had a sense of humor, so I went into it, and I've just never looked back.
So I think this is the key, is that you see so much in these individuals that society might say are less than.
Yes.
Because they have mental health issues. And we both see many patients with mental health issues. But the fact is, you found the more than in them right from the beginning of your career. It didn't take you 20 years to figure out that these people were quite fascinating. Yes. And so I think that's really critical. And then the name of the radio show was Beautiful Minds.
Yes.
Which I think is really cool. And then recognizing the sleep part as being critical, and we knew each other.
Yes,
and
exactly.
You were looking for the last act, as you call it, right?
Yeah.
It's going to last 30 years, just so you know.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And so it's a good addition to the whole team.
Yeah, I really, one thing I've learned in psychiatry is that even though we approach patients as medical specialists, we make a diagnosis, that guides treatment, we've shifted to to not asking this question, what is wrong with you, more what has happened to you.
Right.
And that's
your story, and you're sticking to it.
That's my story, and I am sticking to it.
Okay.
Tell me, I know you're a naturalist, and I don't mean you don't wear clothes, but you love nature, and I know your career before you decided to go to medical school. And we first met when you were a medical student. Then you became a family doctor.
Correct.
And went to a rural community. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about going to that community, and then how you became a sleep expert.
Yeah, sure. No, so I went into medicine at the age of 30, and my prior quote-unquote career was teaching skiing and mountain guiding and things like that. And I used to guide canoe trips in Northern Ontario for 40 days with 17-year-old teenagers. So that was quite an experience. And so most of my life was in the outdoors. And I lived in Jasper in the Canadian Rockies and whatnot. And then I decided to go back to school at 28, try to get into medicine. I was out of school for about 10 years and was successful in getting into medical school. And I always wanted to be a rural family physician. One, I wanted to be a family physician because that's the kind of medicine I wanted to do. And two, I wanted it to be challenging. And it certainly was. So I went to this small town in southern Alberta called Vulcan, Alberta, and which is where who's the guy from?
Yeah, I was just about to interrupt you. I thought Vulcan was or the planet of Vulcan was Mr. Spock. That's where he came from.
Right.
But you're saying it's a small rural town
in southern Alberta.
Where
Alberta. He came from.
Good Lord.
It was another planet.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
And it was the breadbasket of Canada.
Okay. Did you find that when you were in Vulcan that you're an outgoing, sort of an emotional guy, a feelings guy? Did you feel like you were becoming more like Dr. Spock, and or Mr.
Very
Spock?
much so.
Yeah, and okay, all right. So tell me, how did you end up as a sleep expert?
Well, I had some experiences.
That?
So as a rural family doctor in the 90s in Alberta, we would work ungodly hours. So there were 3 doctors in a small town removed from the urban areas, and we would do 7 days of 24-hour calls continuously, and then you'd have 2 weeks of your normal work week and then go back to 24-hour call. And I had 2 pretty remarkable experiences related to sleep deprivation, where I rolled my vehicle in the middle of the winter, and then one where I, in the middle of the night, driving back from the hospital to my house, which was in the prairies. We lived on an acreage. I drove by my house dead asleep in my car and woke up with the front tires of the vehicle in a lake.
I just want to interrupt.
Yes.
You're kidding, right? Like this?
No. This is very serious. No, this is totally serious.
Can't be
totally
true.
serious. The other, totally serious. I have other stories.
Well,
very bad driver. I'm a terrible driver.
Well, I think do you think it's fair to say that you're a terrible driver when you're asleep? And that other, and other people are too. Yeah. But okay. So tell me your first sleep car crash. You've mentioned 2, but tell me the first.
Oh, you want to know the original?
The origin.
Oh, geez. You want to hear that?
Yeah,
story?
I do.
So I was 19 years old. I was driving across the country from Jasper to Montreal with a friend in a Volkswagen VW in 1978. And it was my turn to drive. We were driving continuously to get across the country. And it was 6 o'clock in the morning. And I had just finished sleeping. This is fascinating, actually, from a sleep science perspective. But anyways, I had finished sleeping. It was my turn to drive, so I should have been fully awake. It was 6 in the morning. My partner fell asleep in the car. We were right outside Brandon, Manitoba on the Trans-Canada Highway, and I fell asleep at the wheel. And when I woke up, my friend was grabbing the wheel, trying to steer us in the ditch, and I fought him because I had no idea what was going on. And as I fought him, we actually flipped the car 3 times, and we lived, actually. which is obvious.
That's the amazing. Yeah, I mean, you're here, right?
Here,
but
right.
but I mean, still,
because I know
that is unbelievable.
You weren't sure if I was here.
Yeah, and I just want to comment.
Yeah.
The last two, and I'm assuming you don't have any more, but
I actually do.
Well, let's. But the last two, you survived those also, which is again.
It's shocking.
Striking.
Someone's looking out for me.
Someone is looking out for me.
But I was fascinated by this.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated from the professional perspective because I knew it changed my behavior. That I was, and I was more difficult in the emergency department with patients, with nurses, if I hadn't slept.
Yeah.
And then so I thought this was important for the profession to know about. And we just worked. You know that, you worked and, you survived. But this became very important. And now I'm in charge of a project for the College of Physicians and Surgeons to address this specifically. And that's 25 or 30 years later.
Yeah, well, clearly you have insight into your foibles or whatever you'd call them, but whatever the issues are. But it's also a demonstration. It's why I'm proud to know you, is that you have. It's sort of like parachutes and mines are similar in that they work better if they're open.
Yeah, and your mind is not open when you're sleep deprived.
Exactly.
This is critical.
Exactly.
And that's how doctors operate in very hyper-focused way as you get less and less sleep. And there's a lot of science behind that, actually. So the whole idea here is to understand over the next, 5 episodes what the relationship is to sleep and how it can be disturbed, sleep disorders, and mental health. So that's the key. And you're going to take care of the mental health side, and I'm going to take care of the sleep side. Okay, so we're just going to finish with some tips. And from my perspective, the sort of main tip that I will give every time I'm out giving a talk or teaching is that to improve the depth and quality of your sleep, you need to maintain a stable sleep routine, which means picking a bedtime, and that can be within an hour, and a wake-up time, and that can be within an hour. If you're someone who chooses to nap, keep your nap short, under 30 minutes, and usually mid-afternoon is the best time to nap. So try and focus on that for next week, and then we'll have something else for you.
Yeah, I you've taken over the tips of the day, but I'd like to say a couple of tips if I could. My first tip of the day is that music is healing. Like it's you hear about the blues and that, but it's a healing force. Yeah. And if you look up mental health music, the number one item is "Help" by John Lennon and the Beatles. And if you want to listen to that song, that might make a difference. And then lastly is sort of, like Chuck says, get your head to bed.
Good point. So that's it for us and our first podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and we genuinely hope you've learned something new that will help you. We're casting episodes twice a month with the mission to myth bust and educate those of you who struggle with sleep and mental health. Our next episode is going to be on sleep and culture. So get your head to bed. Get your head to bed.
If we could only remember that it starts with
to bed.
Yeah, head to bed. Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much. That was fun.
That was awesome.